My name is Margaret Maggie Reynolds. I'm 62 years old, and 3 nights before Christmas, my son showed up at my door with snow in his hair and panic in his eyes. Mom, did you like the diamond ring I sent you? He asked. I just stared at him. What ring? I never got any ring. That's when he told me his wife, Vanessa, had signed for the package weeks ago and pawned it for a few $100s to gamble at a casino. In that moment, I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't just about the stolen ring. It was about years of canceled visits, cold excuses, and the slow erosion of the bond between me and my own son. I'd spent the last 3 years convincing myself I was simply an old widow who had to accept being left out. But standing there in my living room, I realized Vanessa hadn't just taken a gift, she'd been taking pieces of my family all along. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought love would make me weak. She had no idea what I was capable of. Stay with me until the end, because I'm going to tell you exactly how I uncovered every one of her lies, turned the tables in court, and reclaimed my place in my son's life. And if you've ever had to fight for the people you love, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The night Ethan came over, I'd been sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the snow pile up outside. The street lights cast everything in a warm amber glow, but the warmth didn't reach me. Winters had felt colder since my husband, Daniel, passed 3 years ago. That night, the quiet of my house felt heavier than usual. When the doorbell rang, I actually jumped. Nobody visits me unannounced, especially not this late. I pulled my cardigan tighter and shuffled to the door, wondering if it was a neighbor or a delivery gone to the wrong address. But when I looked through the peephole, my heart squeezed. It was Ethan, standing there with his shoulders hunched and snow melting in his hair. I opened the door quickly, letting the cold air rush in with him. Ethan, what are you doing here? I thought you were leaving for Aspen tomorrow with Vanessa's family. His smile was thin and didn't reach his eyes. He stepped inside, stamping the snow from his boots. And for a moment, he just stood there, like he didn't know where to start. Then he blurted it out, Mom, did you like the diamond ring I sent you? The words hit me so strangely that I almost laughed, but the look on his face stopped me. I told him I hadn't received any ring, and I swear I watched the color drain from his skin in real time. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck like he used to when he was a kid caught in a lie. Only this time, he wasn't the one lying. Vanessa signed for it 2 weeks ago. I had it engraved, for Mom, with love. It was supposed to be your birthday gift. His voice cracked on the word Mom. And suddenly, I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with age. I asked if maybe it was misplaced, maybe in their closet or in the mail pile, but he shook his head and his eyes glossed over. She pawned it for $350. I found the receipt in her purse. The ring cost me $3,000. Mom, I worked overtime for months. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. Then I felt something hot rise in me, not just anger, but a kind of fierce clarity. This wasn't just a stolen gift, this was something bigger. I motioned for him to sit, and we moved to the living room, where the Christmas tree stood in the corner. Its lights twinkled faintly, casting shadows across ornaments Ethan and his sister made when they were kids. I'd kept them all popsicle stick reindeer, clumsy paper angels, because they reminded me of when we were whole. Ethan sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was bracing for impact. There's more, Mom, he said quietly. I've been finding casino receipts in her car, credit card cash advances. She's been lying about business trips. She wasn't traveling for work. She was in Atlantic City. I tried to process it, but each detail was worse than the last. Vanessa wasn't just gambling. She was building a wall between me and my son. All those last-minute holiday cancellations, the polite excuses for why they couldn't visit, they suddenly made sense. She hadn't wanted me around. I asked him how long this had been going on, but he just shook his head. Maybe since the beginning. I didn't want to see it. He looked so small in that moment, like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. But now the wounds were deeper, and I couldn't fix them with a band-aid. I reached for his hand, squeezing it until he looked up at me. "Ethan, we're going to figure this out, but I need to know everything, every receipt, every trip, every lie." I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the shame, but also the relief of not having to carry it alone anymore. He told me about the $47,000 they'd saved for a down payment on a house, gone. About the nights she claimed to be at client dinners, but her GPS location history showed hotel stays near casinos. About the payday loans, the whispered phone calls he caught pieces of but never questioned. By the time he finished, my tea was cold and my mind was burning. I'd spent 3 years thinking I was fading into the background of my own life, a supporting character in other people's stories, but now I could see the truth. Vanessa had been actively erasing me. And maybe she thought I was too old, too soft, too polite to stop her. She didn't know that Daniel had taught me things: how to keep records, how to dig without being seen, how to protect what's yours. Those habits had never left me. I told Ethan to leave the pawn receipt and any documents he had with me. Why, he asked. I smiled, but it wasn't warm, because information is power, and I think it's time we even the playing field. That night, after Ethan left, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up my Wi-Fi network logs, the same ones I'd kept for years, ever since Daniel warned me about scams targeting seniors. And there it was, 3 months ago. During their last visit, Vanessa had connected her phone to my network and downloaded files. Not work presentations, not photos, casino promo emails, hotel bookings, debt consolidation plans. I saved every one of them in a new folder labeled insurance. I didn't know exactly how this would end, but I knew one thing: Vanessa had underestimated me, and that was going to be her biggest mistake. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Old habit. For years, Daniel and I had started our days early, sipping coffee while the world was still quiet. But now, instead of reaching for the crossword, I reached for the folder on my desk. I opened it slowly, like it might bite me. Inside were the pawn receipt Ethan had left, printed copies of my Wi-Fi logs, and a fresh notepad. I had a plan forming, though it was still vague around the edges. If I was going to protect Ethan and myself, I needed to think several moves ahead. The first step was confirming exactly how much Vanessa had taken. Ethan had told me about the $47,000 in the house fund, but something told me that was only the beginning. People like her didn't stop at one victory, they bled you dry, one lie at a time. I logged into my bank account and pulled up the statements from the past year. I wasn't looking for missing money from me, necessarily. I was looking for patterns, times when Vanessa might have had access to my information. Once, during a barbecue last summer, she'd offered to help me order a kitchen appliance online. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now, I wondered if she'd taken more than just a peek at my Wi-Fi. By the time the sun crept over the rooftops, I'd flagged 3 suspicious transactions, online purchases I never made, all sent to an address in Atlantic City. Not Ethan and Vanessa's address, but a P.O. box. That meant she was running more than one game. I decided to call in a favor. My late husband's best friend, Frank, had been a claims investigator for an insurance company before retiring. We hadn't spoken much since Daniel passed, but Frank was one of those people you could count on when the stakes were high. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Maggie, email me what you've got. I'll see what I can dig up. And don't tell Ethan yet. The less he knows right now, the better. If she senses you're closing in, she'll cover her tracks." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the Christmas tree light still blinking faintly in the living room. My hands were steady, but my stomach was tight. I'd spent years convincing myself I wasn't built for confrontation. That age had softened me. But now, I felt sharper than I had in a long time. 2 days later, Frank called back. His voice was grim. "She's got more debt than your son knows about personal loans, credit cards in her name only, some payday loans she's rolled over multiple times, and that PSO box it's connected to a guy named Ricky Moss, known for loan sharking and high-stakes poker games in Atlantic City." I swallowed hard. So she's not just gambling, she's in deep. Deep enough that she might be looking for a way out that doesn't involve paying it back. Frank said, "And Maggie, she's been asking questions about your house, its value, whether it could be sold quickly." I thanked him and hung up, my mind spinning. It was exactly what I feared. Vanessa wasn't just a threat to Ethan's marriage. She was a threat to my home, my security, my independence. That night, Ethan called to say Vanessa was staying at her sister's. To give him space, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. I asked if he'd found anything else, and he admitted he'd been too drained to keep looking. That was fine. I'd do the looking for both of us. The next morning, I drove into town and walked into Hartley's Jewelry, the store where Ethan had bought my ring. The owner, Mr. Hartley, knew me from years back. Daniel had bought my pearl earrings there for our 20th anniversary. When I asked if they had security footage of the day the ring was picked up, he didn't hesitate. We sat in his small office, and he pulled up the grainy video. There she was, Vanessa smiling at the clerk, signing the receipt, slipping the ring into her purse like it was nothing. Watching it made my chest tighten, but it also gave me exactly what I needed: proof. I left Hartley's with a flash drive in my bag and a new sense of purpose in my chest. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, I was building a case. Over the next week, I made quiet moves. I printed everything: emails, receipts, bank statements, Wi-Fi logs, even screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts that contradicted her family emergency excuses. I kept it all in a locked filing box under my bed. I also started making subtle inquiries, calling a friend who worked in the county clerk's office to ask hypothetical questions about property rights, reaching out to an old neighbor who'd seen Vanessa chatting with a real estate agent at an open house across town. The picture was becoming clearer. Vanessa was looking for a big payout, and if she couldn't get it from gambling, she'd try to get it from me. One night, Ethan called to say Vanessa wanted to talk things out after Christmas. I told him to agree, but only if the meeting happened at my house. Why, he asked. Because, Ethan, she's better at lying when she controls the environment. Here, she'll be on my turf. When I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow fall under the streetlight. I thought about Daniel, about how proud he'd be to see me refusing to be pushed aside. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the family we'd built, for the son who'd been tricked into thinking I was irrelevant. The truth was, I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: by the time Vanessa realized what I was doing, it would already be too late for her to stop me. The afternoon of the meeting, I made sure everything in my house looked deliberate. The chairs in the living room were arranged so I'd have the recliner facing the couch directly. The coffee table was clear, except for 2 mugs and a folder I'd left in plain sight, thick enough to look intimidating, even before it was opened. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. By then, I'd spent nights reviewing every piece of evidence, memorizing dates, transactions, even the exact times she'd logged onto my Wi-Fi. The more I studied, the more I realized Vanessa wasn't just careless, she was arrogant. And arrogance makes people sloppy. Ethan arrived first. He looked pale, his jaw tight, but when I met his eyes, I gave a small nod. "Let me lead this," I whispered. He hesitated but nodded back. He'd been through enough. Today was my turn to take the hits. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Vanessa standing there in a cream-colored coat, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect low bun. If you didn't know her, you might think she was on her way to a charity luncheon. But I did know her, and I could see the flicker in her eyes when she realized she'd be walking into my territory. "Maggie," she said warmly, stepping inside as if she owned the place. Thank you for letting me come. I think we can clear up a lot today. Let's sit, I said, motioning toward the living room. Ethan sat beside her on the couch, his arms crossed. I stayed in the recliner, my back straight, hands resting loosely on my lap. She started with an apology, the kind designed to sound heartfelt without actually admitting to anything. I know the ring situation looks bad, she said, looking at Ethan. Not me, but I can explain. Explain why you signed for it, pawned it for a third of its value, and then lied, I interrupted. My tone was calm, but I saw the tiniest twitch in her jaw. She turned to me, her eyes wide. Pshh, I was in a bad place. Maggie, I've been struggling with gambling. I thought I could win enough to make a big down payment for a house. I didn't want to burden Ethan. You've been struggling for a long time then, I said evenly. Longer than 6 months. Her head jerked slightly, the first sign she wasn't prepared for where this was going. No, that's not. I leaned forward and tapped the folder on the coffee table. Because I have records. Vanessa, from my own internet logs, from the jewelry store, from pawn shops. Records showing your casino activity goes back over a year. Records showing you stayed at the Borgata in Atlantic City the same weekend you told Ethan you were visiting your sick aunt. Her face paled, and she glanced at Ethan, searching for backup. He didn't move. Maggie, you can't just spy on people like that, she snapped, her voice rising. In my own home, on my own network, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Of course I can, and I did. She shifted in her seat, smoothing her coat over her knees. This isn't fair. I came here to make amends, not to be attacked. Amends, I asked, leaning back. Then tell me about the $47,000 down payment fund. Tell me about the payday loans. Tell me about Ricky Moss. Her composure cracked. I don't know who. Don't, I said quietly, cutting her off. You've already underestimated me once. Don't make it worse. For the first time, I saw her confidence falter completely. Her gaze darted between me and Ethan, like she was calculating an escape route. Ethan finally spoke. Vanessa, I found the pawn receipt in your purse. I found the credit card statements. I've been looking the other way for too long. This stops now. She stood abruptly. If this is how it's going to be, then fine. But don't forget I'm entitled to half of everything, including whatever's in this house. I smiled. That's the second time today you've been wrong. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, keeping my tone cool, this house was paid off before you even met Ethan. It's in my name only, and I have the paperwork to prove it. And if you try to come after it, I'll bring every piece of evidence I've collected to court, including the video from Hartley's jewelry of you picking up that ring. She froze. You have video, Gostel. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Ethan stood, stepping toward the door. Vanessa, I think you should go. Her face twisted in something between fury and fear. This isn't over, she hissed, grabbing her bag. You're right, I said. It's just beginning. When the door closed behind her, the air in the room seemed to shift. Ethan let out a long breath and sat back down, rubbing his temples. You okay? I asked. He nodded slowly. Better than I thought I'd be. She's not getting to back down. You know. I know, I said, my eyes drifting to the folder. That's why I'm not either. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the heater filling the space. I knew Vanessa wouldn't take this quietly, but I also knew she'd underestimated me for the last time. And now I was ready for whatever came next. I didn't have to wait long for Vanessa's next move. 4 days after she stormed out of my living room, Ethan called me early in the morning. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. Mom, she filed for divorce, and you're named in it. I sat down at the kitchen table, gripping my coffee mug. Named for what? She's claiming your house is a marital asset, he said bitterly, and she wants half the value. Says I contributed to its upkeep during the marriage. She's also asking for alimony. Based on projected gambling winnings, she claims I cost her by not supporting her career. For a moment, I almost laughed. It was so absurd it sounded like something out of a bad TV drama. But then I felt that cold, familiar knot form in my chest. This wasn't just her trying to squeeze Ethan. This was her trying to take the one thing Daniel and I had built together that was still mine. "Who's her lawyer?" I asked. "Some hotshot from the city. Drives a car worth more than our down payment fund," Ethan muttered. "My lawyer says most of her claims are ridiculous. But she's going to drag it out, make it expensive." That was Vanessa's style: weaponize chaos. Drain your energy until you'd settle just to make it stop. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "Tell your lawyer I want to be a witness," I said. "I have evidence." Ethan hesitated. "Mom, are you sure? Once you're in it, you're in it." "I've been in it since the moment she signed for that ring," I replied. That afternoon, I pulled the locked box from under my bed and spread its contents across the dining room table: receipts, bank statements, pawn shop slips, the USB from Hartley's jewelry with the surveillance footage, and my Wi-Fi logs. I'd also been keeping notes, dates, conversations, small inconsistencies in her stories. I was building not just a defense, but an offense. I called Frank again and asked if he could run a deeper background check. He delivered within 48 hours. Vanessa had a pattern: 2 previous relationships that ended in restraining orders, a history of civil suits with former employers, and a trail of small claims court judgments for unpaid debts. When I showed Ethan the file, he stared at it like it was in another language. How did I not know any of this? "Because she didn't want you to," I said gently. "And because you believed her. That's what people like her count on." Our first court date was set for mid-January. I dressed the way Daniel always told me to when something mattered: sharp, simple, impossible to ignore. Black suit, pearl earrings, hair pulled back. I wasn't there to play nice. The courthouse lobby buzzed with noise the morning of the hearing. Vanessa sat across the room with her lawyer, wearing a cream dress and the smug smile of someone who thought they were still in control. Her hair and makeup were flawless, but I noticed the tightness in her jaw, the way her hands kept smoothing her skirt. When we were called in, the judge, an old acquaintance from my hospital auxiliary days, gave me a brief nod. She knew me. She knew Daniel. That alone gave me more confidence than any legal document. Vanessa's lawyer opened with a performance that would have impressed a jury on a soap opera. He painted her as a victim of financial control and emotional abandonment, forced to find solace in gambling when Ethan restricted her spending. He claimed my home was a shared asset because Ethan had mowed my lawn a few times and fixed a leaky faucet. I watched the judge's expression, neutral, but with the faintest pinch between her brows that told me she wasn't buying it. Ethan's lawyer countered with the facts: receipts for stolen funds, bank records showing the drained down payment account, the pawn ticket for my ring. But I could tell it wasn't enough to crush her narrative completely. That was my job. When the judge called me to the stand, I carried my portfolio like a weapon. I started with the Wi-Fi logs, explaining how I'd monitored network activity for years as a security measure. I handed over records showing Vanessa's gambling activity stretching back 18 months long before her so-called 6-month struggle began. Her lawyer objected, questioning my expertise. The judge overruled him without hesitation. "Mrs. Reynolds is a direct victim in this matter," she said. "Her testimony is relevant." I laid out the timeline: how the gambling trips matched canceled family gatherings, how pawn shop visits lined up with sudden emergencies, how her debts grew even while she lied about investing for the future. Then I dropped the USB into evidence: a clear video of Vanessa smiling as she signed for the ring she claimed had been stolen. Vanessa's face went rigid. She whispered something to her lawyer, who looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I wasn't done. I pulled out Frank's report, public records of her past legal trouble, showing a pattern of financial exploitation in previous relationships. Your Honor, this is not a case of a woman struggling with addiction. This is a pattern of calculated deception, spanning years and multiple victims. The courtroom went still. Vanessa's hands clenched in her lap. When I stepped down, Ethan looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet, widowed mother he'd been keeping at arm's length, but as someone who could fight and win. The judge recessed for lunch, and as we left the courtroom, Vanessa shot me a glare that could have cut glass. But I'd seen that look before. It was the same look kids give when they realize the rules have changed and they're no longer the smartest person in the room. Back in the lobby, Ethan leaned close. She's rattled. She should be, I said. I'm not done yet. The next court session felt different the moment I walked in. Vanessa's lawyer avoided my eyes, flipping through his notes like a man searching for a lifeline. Vanessa, however, came in swinging. Her smile was bigger, brighter, and faker than ever. I knew that smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they'd found a new angle. She didn't waste time. The moment the judge was seated, her lawyer announced they had new evidence that would prove I had interfered in Vanessa's marriage and finances. He made it sound like I'd been plotting from the start, pulling Ethan away from her and undermining her role as his wife. When he called Vanessa to the stand, she launched into a story about how I had spied on her, spread rumors to Ethan's friends, and manipulated him into filing for divorce. She painted herself as a woman fighting not just for her marriage, but for survival against a controlling mother-in-law. It might have worked if I hadn't been ready. When it was my turn to cross-examine, I kept my voice calm and even. Vanessa, you testified that I spread rumors to Ethan's friends. Can you name a single friend I contacted? She hesitated. I don't remember their names. So no names, no dates, no proof, I asked, tilting my head slightly. But you do remember staying at the Borgata in Atlantic City on April 14th last year. Her jaw tightened. That's irrelevant. Your Honor, I said, turning to the judge, I have hotel records and casino transactions from that exact weekend, all in Vanessa Carter's name, as well as a text message to Ethan claiming she was at a business conference in Chicago. Would you like me to submit them now? The judge nodded. Vanessa's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I handed the clerk a folder and continued. Vanessa, you also claimed that I interfered with your finances. Are you aware that the $10,000 you withdrew from a joint account on September 2nd was wired directly to a man named Ricky Moss? Her eyes widened before she could hide it. That was a loan repayment. Funny, I said, because Mr. Moss is known for running illegal poker games in Atlantic City. I have statements from the Atlantic County Police Department confirming his activities, and unless you'd like me to subpoena him, I suggest you be honest about where that money went. Vanessa's face flushed deep red. She glanced at her lawyer, but he looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I pressed on. You accused me of spying, but isn't it true that you connected to my Wi-Fi multiple times without my permission? She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. And isn't it also true that during one of those connections, you accessed payday loan websites, debt consolidation companies, and pawn shop listings, all while telling Ethan you were visiting your sick aunt? The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Mrs. Carter. Yes, she said finally, her voice low, but no further questions, I said, sitting back down. When I glanced at Ethan, his expression was a mix of pride and disbelief. I could almost see the weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time, the truth wasn't just something we knew, it was out in the open, on record, undeniable. But Vanessa wasn't done. After a recess, her lawyer tried to pivot, suggesting that Ethan should still be responsible for rehabilitative alimony so she could recover from the financial hardship caused by the divorce. The judge's eyebrows rose so high, I thought they might disappear into her hairline. Counselor, your client's financial hardship appears to be self-inflicted. This court will not reward destructive behavior. That was the moment I knew we had her. Still, I wasn't about to let her walk away, thinking she'd just lost a skirmish. I wanted her to understand that every step she took from here would be watched. When it was my turn to speak again, I addressed the court directly. Your Honor, Vanessa Carter didn't just gamble away money. She gambled away trust, family bonds, and years of connection between a mother and son. She didn't act out of desperation. She acted out of calculation. And now, faced with consequences, she's trying to twist the narrative to make herself the victim. I'm here to make sure the real victims, my son and myself, get justice. The judge nodded, her eyes hard. Noted, Mrs. Reynolds is the. By the time the day ended, Vanessa's attorney looked defeated. The judge scheduled the final hearing for 2 weeks later, but I could feel the tide had turned completely. Vanessa avoided looking at me as we left the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply on the tile, like she was trying to walk out of her own skin. Outside, the winter air hit my face like a wake-up call. Ethan stopped on the courthouse steps and turned to me. Mom, I don't think I've ever seen anyone dismantle someone like that. I smiled faintly. Daniel used to say the best way to win is to let them trap themselves. All you have to do is close the door. We walked to the car in silence, the snow crunching under our feet. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not because the fight was over, it wasn't, but because Vanessa had shown her hand, and I was holding the cards she didn't even know existed. 2 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse for what I knew would be the last time in this fight. The sky outside was a flat, winter gray, the kind that makes the air taste like metal. I dressed the same way I had for the first hearing, black suit, pearls, hair pulled back because I wanted Vanessa to know nothing about me had wavered. Ethan was already there, pacing near the double doors. He stopped when he saw me, relief flickering across his face. You ready? He asked. I was ready the day she signed for that ring, I said, and he gave a tight, almost proud smile. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the last sessions. Vanessa sat with her lawyer, but the false confidence she'd worn before was gone. Her makeup was perfect, but she couldn't hide the way her fingers twisted in her lap. I recognized that kind of restless energy. It's what happens when a person knows they're out of moves but still can't admit defeat. The judge opened the session with a summary of the case, her voice steady, almost clinical. Then she invited final statements. Vanessa's lawyer went first, recycling the same arguments about emotional stress and financial recovery that hadn't worked before. His voice sounded tired, like even he knew the words were empty. When it was our turn, Ethan's lawyer kept it short. He laid out the timeline of lies, the theft, the gambling debts, the evidence tying Vanessa to every one of them. Then he stepped back and looked at me. Mrs. Reynolds, the judge said, you indicated you had one last piece of evidence you wished to submit. I stood, feeling every eye in the room on me. Yes, Your Honor. In addition to everything I've already provided, I obtained statements from 2 of Vanessa's former employers, both of whom confirmed she was terminated for misappropriating company funds. These terminations occurred before she met my son. The clerk took the documents from me and handed them to the judge. Vanessa's head snapped toward her lawyer, whispering something sharp, but I didn't need to hear it. Her reaction said it all. Mrs. Carter, the judge said after reading the statements, is this true? Vanessa hesitated, then tried to deflect. Those incidents were misunderstandings. They have nothing to do with me. They have everything to do with your credibility. The judge interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Ethan looked down at his hands, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tightening. I knew what he was thinking, how much of their marriage had been real, and how much had just been another setup. The judge didn't waste time. This court finds that Mrs. Carter engaged in systematic financial abuse, theft, and deception throughout the marriage. Her claims to spousal support and any share of Mrs. Reynolds's property are denied. Furthermore, restitution for the documented theft of $47,000 is awarded to Mr. Reynolds, along with attorney's fees. I didn't move, but inside, I felt something uncoil, months of tension unwinding in a single, perfect moment. The judge wasn't finished. In light of the additional evidence, this matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges, including fraud and identity theft. Vanessa's lawyer slumped back in his chair. Vanessa herself stared straight ahead, her face pale and rigid, like a statue about to crack. When the gavel came down, it felt final. We filed out into the hallway, the hum of conversation from other cases filling the air. Vanessa passed by without looking at us, her heels clicking in quick, uneven steps. She didn't stop at the exit, didn't try one last barb or threat. That silence was the clearest admission she'd ever given. Ethan turned to me, his voice quiet. "It's over." I shook my head slightly. The court part is over. Now comes the rebuilding. Outside, the air was colder than when we'd walked in, but I didn't feel it. The courthouse steps felt lighter under my feet. Ethan walked beside me, no longer hunched or guarded. For the first time in months, his shoulders were straight, his face unshadowed. We didn't say much on the drive home. We didn't need to. Every mile we put between ourselves and that courthouse felt like another thread of Vanessa's web breaking apart. Back at my house, we sat at the kitchen table, just like we had the night he first told me the truth. Only this time, there was no weight pressing us down. I poured 2 glasses of wine, and we clinked them together without a word. Finally, Ethan looked at me and said, "You know, I thought I'd feel guilty, but I don't. She did this to herself." "She did," I agreed. "And you stopped letting her do it to you. That's the difference." I glanced at the locked box still under my bed. I'd keep it, not out of spite, but as a reminder, proof of what can happen when you let someone chip away at you slowly. Proof that even at 62, you can take back control. That night, after Ethan left, I stood at my living room window. The snow had started again, falling in soft, slow spirals under the streetlight. I thought about Daniel, about the life we'd built in this house, about how close I'd come to letting someone else rewrite my ending. Not anymore. Vanessa had thought I was just an old woman with no fight left. She'd thought love made me weak. She was wrong. Love had made me ruthless when it mattered. And now, I was just getting started. 6 months after the final hearing, the house didn't feel like the same place it had been during those long, quiet years. It wasn't just that Ethan had been staying here while finding his own place. It was the way laughter had returned, echoing off walls that had known too much silence. The shadows Vanessa left behind had finally thinned, replaced by something warmer, steadier. Ethan's move-out day came on the first weekend of June. His new apartment was a renovated loft downtown, close enough to his office, but not too far from me. We'd spent weeks apartment hunting together, turning it into a kind of ritual. He'd point out a place's flaws, I'd imagine how to fix them, and somehow, we always ended up laughing by the end of the tour. That morning, I was in the kitchen wrapping glasses in old newspaper when Ethan came in, grinning. "Guess who's here to help me haul the heavy stuff?" I wiped my hands and peeked out the window. Ann Stone was standing by his truck, her salt and pepper hair catching the sunlight. She wasn't there as his therapist anymore, hadn't been for months. She was there as the woman who'd walked beside him while he rebuilt his life, and maybe as something more. When she came inside, she gave me a warm smile. "Maggie, I think he's ready for this next step." I looked between the two of them and smiled. So do I. The move was a family affair. My daughter, Claire, arrived from Oregon with her husband and their 2 teenagers. For years, Claire's visits had been rare, her excuses as thin as paper. But since Vanessa was out of the picture, something had shifted. She'd called more, asked real questions, wanted to come home. While the men loaded furniture, Claire and I set up the kitchen in Ethan's loft. She watched me line his spice rack and shook her head, smiling. "You always make a place feel like home." "Maybe because I know what it feels like not to have one," I said. She didn't push, but I saw the understanding in her eyes. That night we gathered at my dining room table for one last meal before Ethan officially moved out. It was the first time in years we'd all been together without tension hanging over us. The air smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, the kind of scents Daniel used to say made a house feel alive. Ethan stood and raised his glass to Mom, who taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what really matters. Claire lifted hers, and to remembering that family's not always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. Even the kids chimed in, their teenage sarcasm softened by the warmth in the room. I sat back, watching their faces, and felt something settle deep inside me. This was the victory, not the court ruling, not the restitution check. It was this table, full again. After dinner, while the others packed up leftovers, Anne stayed behind in the dining room. "He's different now," she said quietly, "not just healed, but stronger." I nodded. "We all are." She tilted her head. "And you, who are you now?" For a long time, I'd have answered that I was a widow, a mother, someone whose best years were behind her. Now, the words came easier. I'm someone who stopped making herself smaller to make other people comfortable, and I'm not going back. Anne smiled, and I knew she understood. The next day, I helped Ethan carry the last of his boxes into his new place. The loft was still sparse, bare walls, a couch that looked too big for the space, but it was his. He hugged me before I left, holding on a little longer than usual. "You saved me, Mom." "You saved yourself," I told him. "I just made sure you had the space to do it." Driving home, I passed through streets lined with blooming trees, their petals scattering in the wind. My house waited at the end of the block, the garden Daniel had loved bursting with color. I parked in the driveway and just sat for a moment, taking it in. The quiet inside no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. The photos on the mantel weren't reminders of what I'd lost. They were proof of what I'd fought to keep. That evening, I walked into the backyard with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, streaking the sky with gold and pink. I sat in the small seating area I'd added last spring, listening to the birds settling in the oak tree. For years, I'd thought my story was over. That age and loss had made me invisible. But standing up to Vanessa had reminded me that power isn't about how loud you are, it's about refusing to be erased. I took a slow sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through me. Somewhere, far away, Vanessa was living with the consequences of her choices. But here, in this backyard, surrounded by the life Daniel and I had built, I was exactly where I belonged. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare me. It was wide open. When I look back now, I don't just see the fight I had with Vanessa. I see the years before it, when I thought getting older meant fading quietly into the background. When I convinced myself that being overlooked was just part of life. I see the moment I decided that wasn't true anymore. This wasn't just about winning a case in court. It was about reclaiming my place in my own family. About proving to myself and to everyone watching that it's never too late to stand up, speak out, and protect what matters. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: love doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable. When someone threatens the people you care about, and you are never too old, too tired, or too late to fight for your own worth. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story has resonated with you, I'd love to hear your own experiences. Leave me a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next time I share what really happened behind closed doors. Because sometimes the most unexpected victories start when someone underestimates you. And I promise you, I'm just getting started.